guys, recording today here on Barely Filtered. Oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. I spent the weekend with my ex-husband and my kids and his friends and my friends in Palm Springs all in one house. I was exhausted because my son turned 6 and, we're hosting, but we kind of don't really get along that great. So we're trying to skirt around each other. And I'm always trying to tiptoe around him, not make him upset, which is just, it's kind of taxing. I get why people don't spend a whole lot of time with their exes because it's emotionally draining. I'm I don't want to say anything that's going to make him mad, but I also kind of can't stand some of his behavior. It was the morning of Remy's birthday party and he was golfing all morning. That's okay. He came back at 1, but I was should we just help ourselves here for the morning? I don't know. It's just the communication. The problem is that the communication was never great to begin with, hence why we got divorced. But it's even worse when you're not together because we try to speak kind of as little as possible to each other. But so when you're trying to end a weekend with people, it can be difficult. So that was my weekend. And I'm about to go tomorrow to Rhode Island so Olivia's wedding is coming up and I'm going to be in Rhode Island for a month. And, I've told you guys before that I struggle with PMS symptoms, cramps, heavy periods, things like that. And so I'm excited today to have on a woman who specializes in the cycle syncing method, which you might have heard of seed cycling so cycle syncing is something that she came up with to help women get in tune with each of the phases of their cycle. And I actually saw recently somewhere that elite athletes who are women perform best during their period, and that this could be a time for you to lean into some of our the characteristics that make you sharper or better fit for certain things. I mean, I'm not an elite athlete. I don't plan on becoming one, but it's just interesting that we can use the 4 phases of our cycle to aid us if we know what to expect in each of those phases. So that's why I've been reading her book called In the FLO, and I'm excited to introduce her to you guys.
How are you? It's nice to meet you.
You too. It's so funny to hear your voice face to face because I'm listening to I'm almost finished listening to your book on Audible though, and you knew.
Oh, yes. Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Nobody else could.
No. Well, I don't know. I don't like it. I'm a big Audible listener, and I don't like when it's somebody other than the author that's narrating because I feel you could just always tell.
It was really funny. I'm sure you have had your moments of serendipity, but I walked into that audio recording, studio for the book, and there was a female sound engineer, and she had read my first book, Woman Code, and we didn't know, they don't know who's coming in that day. So when she saw me came in, she was super fan, and it just created a really nice container for me to do my thing. So it was really a good.
Oh,
really
that's always that's always the best when you feel somebody gets it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's so, I just did your introduction. So, and honestly, I've been kind of sprinkling in bits of things that I've been learning from reading your book throughout my episodes, because a lot of my listeners are women, and, even our male listeners, I feel it's helpful for them to have a better idea about the female cycle, because they have to live in this world with us, right?
If they're in relationships of any sort with women, I think, it's so important for all of us, whoever we're relating to be more biological rhythm aware, because men have their pattern, women have their own pattern, and we should, understand that and support it as best we can, but I think what's ended up happening, because women have been left out of this research for so long, is that we sort of have this default setting to support the male hormonal pattern and to exclude the female hormonal pattern. And it's really to the detriment of women and their health and well-being that we're doing that. So that's just got to stop. And I hope, as more women understand their own biological rhythm, that can be something that shifts.
I hope so too, because I think a big part of what I have realized in my own life is this guilt that I've kind of been carrying around about not being like a man, about not being the same person I was yesterday and the same person I'm going to be tomorrow, just like cognitively, energetically, emotionally. And I love the way you talk about it too, because we talk about our menstrual cycle, especially the part of it when we're bleeding, as like, oh, this is such a burden. But the way you describe it, it can actually be used as like a superpower in a way.
Such a gift. I mean, there's so many beautiful things that you just said. I think so many of us, right at the moment of puberty, we're really, without being empowered, armed with this knowledge, we start to really self-criticize about this very thing that you just mentioned, that you're not the same each and every day. And we judge ourselves for that. We fight to try to be the same each and every day. I think if all of us sort of look back at our teens, early 20s, think about the rituals and routines you were doing just to try to be the same every day. Your routines were the same. You're trying to eat the same calories. You're trying to do the same work, go to the same workout class every day. And this striving for sameness, which can easily turn into like a perfectionist kind of trap, really comes out of the fact that we just are completely missing the knowledge about this infradian rhythm that we have, that I uncovered and wrote about in the book, In the Flow. And it explains that we're just different week over week within a monthly menstrual cycle. And once you know that you're supposed to be different, then you can kind of just immediately start letting go of this like striving to be the same every day, which I think is such a burden and doesn't serve you from a health perspective. Then on the other side, why this is such a superpower, when you tap into these hormonal shifts that are taking place in your brain, in your metabolism, in your stress response, and all of these other things, you just get to go farther faster with less wear and tear on your body. And that's just the highest level of why it's a superpower. But there's so many other nuanced things around, leaning into these different brain changes and all the things you can accomplish. But I think if we can just walk away with the idea that your dynamic nature is your superpower, your ever-changing hormonal nature is your gift, is something that you should celebrate, lean into, and leverage, that would be a big first step for a lot of women to take.
So I'm hearing you don't have like a favorite cycle. Well, how many are there? First of all, let's start there. There's like, I'll let you explain before I butcher.
There are 4 phases to the cycle, right? Yeah. The follicular phase, where all the little eggs are developing on the ovary. The ovulatory phase, where one of those eggs matures and breaks off and takes its journey down the fallopian tube. And then there's the luteal phase, which is, I would say that is my favorite phase.
Really? That's like PMS, right?
If you do it wrong, yes.
Okay, that's what I know about it.
If you support yourself, it's like the best phase ever. It's the longest phase. It's the progesterone forward phase, but most of us aren't making enough progesterone because we're not taking care of our cycle phases the right way. And by the time we get to that phase, we're so progesterone depleted that we just feel all those symptoms of PMS. But the luteal phase is a really profound phase. You 3D print an organ during the luteal phase, the endometrium. It's a really specialized organ. It's if anybody's tried to conceive, you'll know how important the endometrial lining is. And then the menstrual phase, or the bleeding phase. I always find it really confusing that we don't have enough vocabulary to describe these things. It's like, oh, menstruation could be the whole month or just when you're bleeding. So let's just call it bleeding when you're bleeding, and then the menstrual cycle is the whole thing. Right. Just to keep it straight. So those are the 4 phases, and they each do different physiological things within the ovary and the uterus, but they also each have distinct hormonal patterns that make us think and feel and function in distinct ways as well.
Right. Okay. So that's one of the things that I didn't know before reading your book. There's another book that I read before yours called Period Power, and she talks about the 4 phases as like Maisie Hill talks about them kind of as seasons. Do you kind of think the cycles also mimic seasons, or not really?
I mean, I think whatever you feel attached to is, and whatever analogies work for you, I think is great as you get comfortable and familiar. Because I think that's the big issue for so many women, is we feel so disconnected from our cycle in general. We don't know which phase we're in. We're not sure how it's supposed to feel. And beyond that, 80% of women are struggling with PMS. That means 80% of women have a hormonal imbalance, because PMS is a hormonal imbalance. It's not like something that's supposed to happen. This whole period mythology that we've been walking around with, or that we've inherited since biblical times, is basically saying, just by virtue of being female, you're cursed because of the cycle, because of this whole monthly experience. Has no basis in any sort of, scientific reality, but we've perpetuated as part of a cultural story. And women then, of course, believe it. And what you believe, you kind of,
right, like a self-fulfilled prophecy.
Yeah.
Well, even with that other book I was just talking about, she kind of talks about the bleeding phase as the winter. And, if you've heard of like the red tent or anything where it's like women need to kind of go away and hibernate and be, maybe I misread what she's saying, because she has a very progressive outlook on all of this. But for me, I'm like, when I have my period, am I supposed to feel really tired and or want to be home more? Is there a way that
No.
you're inclined to feel?
No, I mean, so you're supposed to feel great each phase of the cycle, but oftentimes women don't, and I think that's when you want to give yourself some permission to feel whatever it is that you're feeling, and give yourself that space to recover. So, one of the things that I recommend that women do is just sort of start where they're at. And I created an app called MyFLO, which has this circle icon that talks about, which of the phases you're in, what you could and should be feeling, and allows you to track the symptoms that you're having in each of these 4 phases. So you can start to see how maybe off your hormones are in general, and start to work toward, using the cycle syncing method that I created to help you really regain that hormonal balance. Because you should feel great throughout the month, and you should feel like you can do whatever it is you want to do in each of the phases of the cycle, right? So, for example, I got married on day 2 of my bleed. That was like
I'm on day 2 of my bleed right now.
Yeah, like we were looking at the calendar, and I was like, this is going to fall on day 2. I'm thrilled because I feel great on day 2.
Really?
And I feel great every day, but I was like, this is going to be great, because then when we go for the honeymoon, I'll be, in that other phase, which will be better for the activities of the honeymoon. But, you can do whatever it is that you want in any of the phases. This idea that you must, let's say, try to change your behavior to match a season doesn't necessarily need to be something that you strive for. What I want women to do, and why I created the cycle syncing method, is to just look at the sort of facts of the hormonal patterns and what the biology requires, and to build a self-care system that follows that's aligned with that isn't about analogies around seasons and lunar phases and things that are outside of us. I said, what's inside of us, what's happening inside of us, and how can we support that so that we can start to feel good each phase of the cycle the way that we're supposed to. And that, I think, is why so many women have been resonating with it, why it's gone viral, and why so many women are using the method to recover from things like PMS, to improve their fertility, to deal with perimenopause. Because once you understand that you have so much power to support your hormones, then, it changes the whole relationship that you have with your body, which has gone from something that you kind of have this like, passive, it's my period, it's supposed to be miserable, there's nothing for me to do, to realizing, actually, I can do everything to start to feel the way that I want. Yeah.
I mean, I feel really empowered by that. Although I won't lie, it's been daunting. So I'm somebody who I had 3 miscarriages. I have 2 living children that I birthed. One that I had pretty bad postpartum, like catastrophic anxiety with. I was put on Zoloft. It kind of like masked my symptoms. I was put on hormonal birth control because of really heavy periods and cystic acne. And like even today, so I have these 2 at home. I have these 2 kits that I've been sitting there for months because I'm supposed to spit into it like on day 3, on day 7, on day 10, and just to get like a really accurate reading of my hormones. And I haven't been able, I keep either like one day I'll forget, and then I'm like, I need to start completely over. And I'm like, I don't have all the answers yet, but I know that there's certain things. Like I remember from your book, you were saying like a lot of those symptoms, my period symptoms sound like estrogen dominance. If you're getting like heavy, well, I'll let you speak to that. But when you hear somebody saying they have like cystic acne, heavy periods, cramping, how would we diagnose ourselves?
Everybody has a unique situation. Without diving fully into whole your whole specific set of symptoms and situations. Hard for me to say just sort of off the cuff, oh, it's definitely this or that.
Right.
But what I can say is that postpartum is a unique time in terms of hormonal, imbalance and re-regulation. You have sort of like robust levels of estrogen and progesterone during the pregnancy, and then they like precipitously come down postpartum, which can have a really profound impact on your brain. Remember, the ovaries and the brain are constantly talking to each other, right? And this is what's really unique about women, is there's this biofeedback loop between the ovaries and the brain. And so the way your ovaries are functioning really does impact the way that you feel. And if there's anything that's, going on there, and if they're pumping out new levels of estrogen that are lower than you're used to or higher than you're used to, you're going to feel that with your mood. You're going to have symptoms. You're going to have things that are showing up on the skin. You also may be someone who struggles with metabolizing estrogen, breaking that down in the liver, in the large intestine, because you have, let's say, you're overindulging in saturated fats, or you have a gut microbiome disruption that you're not really, aware of. All of that is going to make it more difficult for you to break down estrogen. So you might be making a perfectly reasonable amount of estrogen, but you just may not be breaking it down the way that you need to. And then that kind of creates that backup as well. So there are many ways in which things can go off. But the good news is the way forward is relatively straightforward, right? And this is what I wrote about in my first book, Woman Code, and how I supported women have been supporting women for so long, is really looking at how do we just really get the endocrine system to do its job? How do we get out of its way, and how do we support it in functioning the way that it wants to? And that's sort of the FLO protocol that we're very well known for. But cycle syncing is something that you can use once your cycle is regular. So for some women who are struggling, let's say postpartum, your period hasn't even come back yet, or you've been placed on synthetic birth control, postpartum or not, and you don't have a cycle, it's going to be difficult for you to figure out which phase of the cycle you're in and to start to sync up. So you want to really look at, before you get into cycle syncing, make sure that your hormones are functioning to the point where you're having a regular, healthy cycle. If you're having just garden variety PMS, then start with cycle syncing, because that's something that it will easily address.
Okay. And for people who are listening and have never heard of cycle syncing, obviously they can check out your book in the FLO or your app, MyFLO. But can you give us like the Spark Notes version of what cycle syncing is?
Yes. So, after this, like uncovering this infradian rhythm that women have, which is the second biological clock that we have that governs the menstrual cycle, but it governs so much more than that. It governs our brain, our immune system, our stress response system, our metabolic speed, and those all change throughout this monthly cycle. It dawned on me that we needed a method to support that. And so the cycle syncing method is what I created to help us do that. It has 3 pillars: food, fitness, and time management. So you are essentially synchronizing 2 things about your food: caloric intake throughout the cycle phases, and I'll explain that in a minute, and food type throughout the cycle phases. Then you're also, from a fitness point of view, also looking at 2 things. You're looking at workout type and workout intensity or duration. And then from a time management point of view, we're looking at specifically what's being stimulated in the brain and how can we play to those strengths. So that's it at a high level. And a lot of us who want to like do it all at once think about, oh my gosh, I have to change all these things, I'm overwhelmed. First of all, it's not a diet. You don't have to be very good at it. Even if you do this 50% of the time, your body will pay you back 2-fold, 3-fold in terms of hormonal balance. But again, lean into the MyFLO app, because that's the only cycle syncing app, and it will allow you to just do this without having to sort of think about it, right? There recipes, meal plans, workout videos,
nice.
everything, the planner, everything's in there to just make it so easy for you so you don't have to become a subject matter expert. But let me sort of dive into the food piece and break that down a little bit more. So your metabolism is not the same, as I mentioned before, like, throughout the cycle. Specifically in the first half, the follicular and the ovulatory phases, your metabolism is slower. So you can eat fewer calories at this time. In fact, this is the part of the cycle from a food perspective you'll feel the most at home with, because it's probably what you're already doing, lighter things, steamed veggies, lighter grains, smoothies, salads, all of these things that we think are part of a healthy diet. That's sort of what you'll be eating in the first half of the cycle. Once you're done with ovulation and you move into the luteal phase, the second half, because you're 3D printing that organ, right, which you do not do out of your imagination or thin air, right? You do it out of the calories that you're eating and the macronutrients and micronutrients you have on hand. You need 279 more calories per day.
Okay.
If you don't give your body those calories to support that increased metabolic rate, you will have all sorts of neurotransmitter chaos with ghrelin and leptin. You're going to feel hungrier. You're going to be more bingy. You're going to feel like you can't control yourself. You're snacking more because you're not eating proactively more calorie-rich diet during the day. So that's just from the caloric point of view. From the food, specific food type, the in the FLO food chart in chapter 4 is very well known, and people have cut and pasted all over the interwebs. But what I will say is that the design behind that is to help you both make adequate levels of hormones, but even more importantly, break down estrogen throughout the cycle.
Right. Okay.
Because, for example, during ovulation, you have this super surge of estrogen.
Right. That's when I get my cystic acne, right? And I feel it because I'm I can feel myself ovulating and then I'll get the cysts at the same time.
Right. So you're having an estrogen metabolism issue, it sounds like, the more we're talking about some of your symptoms. But again, we need to dive deeper,
okay,
maybe after the call.
Podcast.
But then, so the foods that are recommended are foods that really supercharge your liver with the micronutrients it needs to go through the 3 phases of detoxification. So you're going to eat lots of raw veggies, smoothies, salads, all rich in glutathione, vitamin C, B vitamins, really going to help the liver break that estrogen down, but also have the fiber to get that out of your intestines, right? Because you got to excrete estrogen through the bowels. Then
this is during ovulation, or this is
during ovulation, right?
Okay.
So we're eating fewer calories, but we're using food strategically, right? Then we move to the luteal phase. Now we have to eat more calories, but we also want to use food strategically to stabilize blood sugar and to help with transit time in the gut, because once progesterone enters the scene in the luteal phase, transit time in the gut slows down. You may remember from the early stages of pregnancy how difficult it was to have a bowel movement in the first or second trimester, right? Because you have this huge amount of progesterone. It slows things down in the beginning until your body gets used to it. But every month women have this experience of slightly sluggish bowel movements in the luteal phase, which is why period pooping is something that's so widely discussed, because the progesterone, is gone, and all of a sudden the bowels are freed up to do their business. But we want to make sure that we're really continuing to push estrogen out through the bowels during the luteal phase. So you're going to be using foods in the food chart that are really high in both soluble and insoluble fiber, but that also slow the absorption of glucose in the blood. So you're going to be using, sweet root vegetables, fats, cooked leafy greens. You're going to kind of avoid raw foods at this time because, again, that slower digestion is going to make eating those things more, let's say, bloating forward, right? So you want to eat foods that are going to be easy on your system, but also keep your blood sugar stable. Why do we want to keep blood sugar so stable in this phase of the cycle, in the luteal phase? Because if you want to make enough progesterone to not have any PMS symptoms, you've got to protect your insulin levels with stable blood sugar. And once insulin is stabilized, then cortisol is happy, and then we're not stealing the opportunity for your body to make progesterone from the master hormone pregnenolone, which is also converted into cortisol. So if you're not eating consistently, like you think, I'm just going to have a smoothie for breakfast in the luteal phase, or I'll have just a coffee and then go for my workout, and then I'll eat or I'll skip lunch. That's it. You're now jacking up cortisol. You have to make more cortisol. Cortisol talks to your fat cells to convert stored fat into glucose so that you have enough glucose for your brain, your heart, and your muscle tissue to function, because you're not eating enough. So you see, it's all strategically to make sure that we keep these master hormones happy so that you can make enough estrogen and progesterone throughout the cycle to have no cycle symptoms, right? And that's the food piece. And it's really, once you get into the habit, it becomes second nature. And you notice, yes, I feel hungrier now. I'm in the luteal phase. I'm going to eat this way. Your cravings go away. Your binging goes away. Your PMS goes away, most importantly.
Yes, we all need, I know a lot of
80% of us need that. Yes.
I guess not all of us do. I thought maybe all of us do, but I know I definitely do. And I feel like somebody's playing this trick on us too, because it's like when we need to be eating more calories is kind of when at least I feel a little bit more bloated and, a little more PMS, or like I just want to eat all the bad stuff at that time. And also I used to think that fasting was good for, because a lot of these like intermittent fasting books are written by men, evidently for men, and we as women are kind of taking it on and hoping it works for us, and then when it doesn't, it's like even more shame.
Yeah, that cannot be underscored enough. Women have been left out of most medical fitness and nutrition research, and for the past, easily 75 years, women have been the biggest target of advertising from like the diet and fitness and wellness kind of conversation. And yet all the studies, everything that you've ever read about at least 5 years ago and before, were always things that had only been really researched on men and maybe postmenopausal women or women who are on birth control, and then sort of shared as if this were the thing we've all been looking for. I remember maybe 7 years ago the news cycles were all about how HIIT workouts and intermittent fasting were the gold standard for everyone should be doing it, and this is how everyone's going to finally get healthy, get the weight stuff managed, and fix all their problems. And when I dug into the research as I was writing my book in the FLO, I just not believe how really gender biased that was. It was when we looked at the impact of those practices on cycling women, they were not having the same outcome. They were not getting the same results. And often they were making their hormone issues worse,
right,
or creating new ones that they hadn't had before. So, during your reproductive years, again, your body is doing very specialized things, from, creating all of these endometrial, organs every month, to, making sure that you're ovulating, to making these hormones, breaking these hormones down. And the female body is very, very efficient. So, we can really, by aligning our self-care practices with our biology, which happens to be cyclical, we get to finally feel the way that we're supposed to. And we don't have to just take the crumbs of the research that has been done on men and use it experimentally in an ecosystem, a female hormonal ecosystem that it was never designed to be used in. We should take all of those things with a huge grain of salt when we read them, and just look and say, who was actually studied, and is this something that's safe for me to try? And I'd love to see more reporters being very upfront disclosing of the fact that, oh yes, this is an interesting body of research, but it was only done on men or postmenopausal women. So everybody else, this is not for you. Yeah. It would be great. And on the other side of that coin, because over the past couple of years since the book has come out, there's been a growing conversation around how there's just this lack of research and lack of funding for women's health issues. We're at the beginning of a brand new era of funding and research that will take place for women in their reproductive years. And it is an amazing time, but we just have no idea what's going to come out of it.
I know.
So, it's really exciting.
I'm excited. Yeah. I'm excited. I'm here for it. And I feel bad for the women who came before us who didn't have that opportunity. Question for you. Do you talk at all about seed cycling? Is that something that you believe in or that you use in your work?
Absolutely. Seed cycling is a great place to like dip your toe. You know, if you're someone who's skeptical, and I don't blame you if you are, because again, how many times have women been led down a rabbit hole or a garden trail and they've kind of been, burned. So be skeptical, be a researcher, be, in the experiment and dip your toe. Seed cycling is a great way to try that. And you might see some benefits from it, but, keep in mind that you're only modifying a small percentage of your diet. So it's not going to be this, huge impact that, changing your food and your fitness will. Another place I often encourage women to be experimental with the cycle syncing method is actually with fitness. We have a great partnership with Obey Fitness inside of the MyFLO app. I've curated workouts for each of the 4 phases to really support your fitness journey through the cycle. And what you can do is just start doing that. Don't worry about changing your diet. Don't do anything else. Just do that and just notice the impact of doing the right workout type and the right intensity on your different cycle phases to see how you do during your PMS week. Because that's what we want to see. Anything that you do with cycle syncing, you should start to see within 2 to 3 cycles, right? An impact on overall symptoms, the amount of symptoms that you're having and how bad those symptoms are. If they start to get better and you have fewer symptoms, your body is letting you know that the new self-care practices that you are doing that align with your cycle are helping. And then you want to kind of double down, right? Then you want to start adding in the food. You can also just, for example, pick calorie intake to start. And workouts, you can play with it. It's a method, it's flexible. It's something that you're supposed to make your own and to really, have it be a practice that you're using for the 3 to 4 decades that you have a cycle, right? So It's not like something you have to be perfect at every day. You're in it to win it for like 30 to 40 years. So this is something you got to get comfortable with. You want to master it over time. And baby steps are the way to learn anything new.
Yeah, I find that like when I get passionate about something, I want to do everything and I want to do it perfect. I want to do it all right away, but then I burn out. So I like that there's small things that you can take, because I'm not going to lie, I didn't love the part where you were like, caffeine's bad for you. I was like, all right, well, this is where I draw the line, because like my coffee in the morning is just, it's sacred to me. And I found, there's so much research around, I think everybody now learning how toxic alcohol is. And so cutting back on that or eliminating that completely is something that I've tried to embrace and that I'm doing pretty well with. And that, and like to do that alongside with also getting rid of caffeine just feels daunting. So I'm like, what seeds can I eat instead?
Listen, you gotta find a way that works for you. And, you may be someone, so here's the deal with caffeine. I know I'm quite famous for talking about it and initiating the conversation many years ago about why caffeine is something women should think about. But, the deal is 50% of the population has a variation in a specific gene, the CYP1A2 gene. If you have a variation in this gene, one of the things that you cannot make is an enzyme to break down caffeine in your body efficiently. You don't make enough of this enzyme.
What does the symptoms of that look like?
You can look it up on the Mayo Clinic's website, because this is not my opinion. This is just some information, medical information. It's called caffeine toxicity. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that one of the biggest symptoms of that is anxiety. And one of the largest symptoms that women struggle with is anxiety, and, compared to men. And it's interesting because 80% of women, as I mentioned over and over again, are suffering from PMS. This is an important statistic. Like, I know you're not like daunted by that statistic as I'm sharing it with you, but if men,
my reality,
if 80% of men were facing like a universal issue like that, there would be like a full court press to figure out a cure. not just a, like, that's what true. Are we doing wrong? Let's clean up the PFAS in the water supply. Let's get everything, but nonetheless, men are not suffering to the same extent with hormonal imbalances because they have a ton of research to support their hormonal pattern, which happens to follow a 24-hour circadian sort of pattern. And because they're taking care of that, because the world of work and everything else defaults to that pattern, they're not experiencing the same dysregulation to their hormones that we are. But, caffeine toxicity is something that women with hormonal issues tend to suffer with more. So you have to look at, do you have any of these symptoms? I experienced them pretty intensely in my early 20s. And so I had no choice. I mean, I had like all the symptoms of caffeine toxicity. It was very overwhelming. Of course, I didn't know that was what it was at the time, as it wasn't being discussed. But I nonetheless cut the caffeine out and felt, worlds better. And it was just not an issue for me to go and use it. So I've been caffeine free now for 25 years. Totally fine.
Yeah.
I think you can use adaptogens in the morning. Like there's nothing like a little cocktail of ashwagandha, schizandra, lion's mane, reishi, and chaga in the morning to help your hormones, protect your adrenals, and give you energy and mental focus without the rush of caffeine if you're someone who can't use caffeine. But you don't have to give it up. Let's say you realize you have a little bit of this issue with caffeine and you still love it so much you just can't bear to part with it. I hear you. I'm here for you. What I'm going to tell you to do is just please never have it on an empty stomach ever, ever again.
Interesting, because that's like totally what I do. But I'm one of those people, and I think a lot of people, I've heard this before, so it's not just me, where people are like, oh, well, I can have a cup of coffee like at 9 p.m. and still go to bed. So like caffeine doesn't really affect me. Well, what would you say to people who say that?
I mean, if that's true for you, that's true for you, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're part of the 50% of the population that metabolizes caffeine super fast. You don't have this gene variation, and that's great. Although I think it will definitely change as you move through either andropause as a man, which begins at 25, or you move through perimenopause, which begins at 35 for women. And you may find that having that caffeine later in the afternoon keeps you awake, disrupts your sleep, increases vasomotor issues like hot flashes during sleep. And you may just find that you can't do that so much in the afternoons anymore. So, do it while you can. I'm not here to say do it, don't do it. I'm here to give you information so you can make empowered choices for your self-care practices. And that's what we all deserve as women, is just to have the full knowledge. But the idea that you can, if you're struggling with PMS, think that you can wake up on an empty stomach and have caffeine at any phase of the cycle as your first meal of the day is not a sustainable practice.
Okay, I'm going to try it, because now you're convincing me, because I really do struggle with PMS, and I really do drink coffee on an empty stomach every single day. So
and if anxiety has been an issue for you at all, you'll see how differently you feel the whole rest of the day when you don't start your day with that. Just have your breakfast first. Yeah. And then have the caffeine.
Okay, I could do that.
Meal. Yeah, just have it right after the meal, right? Because it's just gonna slow the whole, insulin and cortisol spike.
Got it. So I have a lot of questions that people have sent me for you. I'm just going to read some of them. Oh, this is an interesting one. So, do birth control pills cause blood clots?
That's an interesting question. I think there have been, for some women, some issues with that, but for the vast majority of women, birth control pills are relatively safe. So I think it's just looking at, do you have any issues of clotting in your family history that you need to be bringing up to the attention of your medical provider when considering that medication, and just being, bringing all that information to the conversation before you make a decision about using it.
My mom's sister actually died from a blood clot in her lung from the birth control pill, but this was in the 70s. I think they've come a long way with the pill since then. But would you say that, I know you're not going to make a firm stance on this, but are you a fan of the birth control pill?
I'll make a firm stance on that.
Okay.
I think that, the birth control pill, and I wrote about this in the book, so my opinion is exactly what I've shared many, many times, which is what a wonderful, piece of medication that has really transformed the lives of women for the past 75 years in terms of family planning and sexual liberation and all of those things. So that's all good. And having access to that is really important as a right for women. So I think that's really great. What I think we need to have a more nuanced conversation about is, using this one medication as the universal treatment for absolutely every female issue. It is silly. It's just silly because we don't do that with men. Men have many, many options for all their specific health issues. But for women, from, the beginning of your menstrual cycle to even menopausally, birth control is sort of like this supposed panacea. And I think it's just important that women understand what it can do, what it can't do, and what it might do to you from a side effect perspective, not just things like the blood clots, which, again, are super rare, but more, the disruption to your gut microbiome, which happens when you take that kind of medication, or the impact on your liver, or the depletion of micronutrients, overall that affect your hormonal health. The impact on your brain, right? There's a doctor who talks about how it really fundamentally changes your personality when you're on this medication. And of course, because you're shutting off all of your own ovarian secretion of estrogen. And remember, I said earlier, your brain and your ovaries are in a constant dialogue, and you then shut that off. It's going to change how you think and feel and move through the world. And you're now on a synthetic form. You're going to feel and think and be very different. So I think it's just so, and of course you don't have your infradian rhythm. You don't have a cycle. You don't ovulate. You don't menstruate. Yes, you may have some breakthrough bleeding, but it's not a period. So just, there's so much more nuanced conversation we should be having. And then one more thing I'll say is that I think for younger girls, 13, 14, 15, who are being put on this medication as like the first line of treatment for teenage acne, cramps, things that are happening with their cycle, what an opportunity there to create a different trajectory for someone to say, hey, while you're young, while these things are brand new, let's use the levers of diet and lifestyle. Let's engage the cycle syncing method to clear up the little bit of teenage acne and a little bit of cramps. And I appreciate this. For some girls, it can be very severe depending on what their childhood journey has been with food and chemical exposure. But, let's give that a try first. The body being so young will, recover more quickly. And then, birth control can be used the way that it was intended, which is to prevent pregnancy, not to cure all of these other issues, which it doesn't cure in the first place. So, that's my opinion.
I'd say I agree with you on that. But also, why can't men take something to prevent pregnancy? Why do we?
There is this is actually pretty cool. There's maybe about 15 years ago, there was a trial. Men were being given an oral medication the pill, to stop them from being fertile. And after about 2 weeks, all the men were experiencing the same thing that women experience when they start taking the pill: the depression, the mood swings, the bloating. They felt very different, and they all quit the trial, and the whole thing was stopped. So that was the last of it. But then just recently, there's been a new gel that's been developed that men allegedly can rub on their shoulders, and that supposedly affects sperm count to such a degree while they're still using it that renders them, let's say, unable to reproduce. So it's in trials right now. It's very interesting, and I do think that could be something that evens the playing field in terms of responsibility for family planning a little bit more.
Okay. I can't wait to hear about that one. I'm going to do one more question. It's actually a 2-part question, but this person wants to know, is hair loss related to hormones? Is there a correlation between that? And also, what about melasma related to hormones? Is there any way we can kind of manipulate that ourselves?
So hair loss is definitely something that can be stimulated by hormonal issues. I'm someone who used to suffer from PCOS. I used to be over 200 pounds. I used to have cystic acne all over my face, chest, and back. I did not menstruate from the age of 12 to 22. It was pretty intense. And hair growth in unwanted places and hair loss in unwanted places was all part of that, as well as mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and insomnia. So I really have experienced it all when it comes to sort of hormonal chaos. And I really, first and foremost, just want to express how emotional it is when stuff like that is happening, because when it, oftentimes most hormonal things are happening so internally that people can walk around the world and in their lives without their hormonal issues being like front and center for other people to be aware of. But when it's all over your face or in your hair or on your body, it does have an impact on how you feel about yourself. And I totally appreciate that. So I just want to say that first and foremost, if you're going through that, I feel you, I've been there, and it's not fun. But the good news is, having been on the other side of that for so many years and recovering using the levers of diet and lifestyle, both using macronutrients, otherwise known as food, and micronutrients, so otherwise known as supplements, really using both to help create hormonal balance in the body, micronutrient replenishment so that the body can, let's say, balance out the things that it needs to grow hair or to metabolize estrogen properly. All of those things are things that you have agency over. The thing that's the most frustrating for women with these issues to grapple with is the commitment in time that it takes, right?
Yeah.
So it isn't something, for example, if you start using like a minoxidil topical for your hair, right? If you have hair loss, you're going to see some results pretty quickly. And then as long as you keep using it, you'll have results. And that may be a perfectly reasonable path for you to take. But if you're not willing to do that and you want to go the natural route, then you've got to be like having the expectation that this is going to be a longer journey, 6 months, 12 months, and that you want to stay consistent to see results. So if that's just something really important to share, because I think so often there's plenty of great articles out there. We have some on our blog on the FLO Living website about the micronutrients to use. For example, if you have excess androgens due to PCOS, which micronutrients are helpful, things like zinc, et cetera, that really help with that. But you want to be super consistent over time and be patient. And so, you want to just think about how are you going to navigate that emotionally as well as practically. Melasma, and other skin issues, whether it's rosacea, eczema, acne, all of these things have a gut component, microbiome component, as well as a hormonal component. So, in the FLO protocol that I outline in Woman Code, one of the things that we do is work on gut health, because it's so integral to how your body responds to estrogen. And how your body responds to estrogen, of course, plays out in your skin. Anybody who's going through perimenopause or menopause will tell you how differently their skin performs from one half of the cycle that's, let's say, more estrogen rich to the half of the cycle that's more estrogen low. And their skin performs very differently. If you have rosacea, you might have a flare up in the luteal phase leading up to your bleed, et cetera. So there's definitely a hormonal component. Melasma in particular has more to do with pregnancy hormones than the other ones, but all hormones are hormones, and we just have to learn how to navigate these things and get an education on how to do what in each of these scenarios. And that's something that we do at FLO Living really well. So if you're having any of these issues, come to the site, take the free hormonal assessment, get the support that you need. You don't need to figure this out on your own. And I think that's the other wonderful thing that's happening, is not just all the new research that's going on, but everything that's happening in the femtech world. FLO Living, the company I created included, being one of the first femtech companies in the world to really be helping women navigate these hormonal issues. Because when I was going through it, I mean, it was just so horrible. There was no support, there was no guidance, there were no Substack newsletters. This was like pre-internet, and pretty much. And so, the idea that that you had to figure this out on your own was just so I just couldn't sit with that. So I
so overwhelming.
I became very committed to building a company that would help other women not feel so isolated. So that's what
thank you so much, because on behalf of all women, we thank you, because it really is just so overwhelming. There's nothing worse than having these symptoms and not knowing even where to begin. So I'm so happy that we're starting to be more vocal about it, and women are doing amazing research, and it sounds like even some men are trying to help us out by by maybe being part of those studies to find some birth control that they can take. But thank you so much for sharing about your book and your new app.
So the website is FLO Living. The books you have, yes, Woman Coded in the Flow, and the app is called MyFLO. And again, it has a circle icon, not a feather icon. And
yes, and I have both of those, and I was like, wait, what? I don't think I have the right one.
And actually, I'm very happy to get, for everybody who's listening, you're all welcome to download the app for free. But then if you want to use the code Barely Filtered, you can get a free month of access to the cycle syncing feature inside the MyFLO app.
Yay, amazing. And then what are those supplements I see behind you? You got
those are the supplements. Yeah. So on FLO Living, one of the things that I've, done over the years of researching all of these issues is to formulate specific supplements that are sort of really tailored for women who have PCOS or heavy bleeding or are trying to prepare their body for conception or going through perimenopause, who are on birth control or coming off. We have our supplements that are tailored for each of the phases of the cycle. So they're just really special formulations that are, therapeutically dosed at doses that are really going to give an impact. Yeah, so that's why you would go to FLO Living and take the free hormonal assessment to help you navigate what your hormone issues might be and which of the supplements might be right for you.
Amazing. I love that. I'm going to do that right now when I get off this call. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I know that all the listeners are going to get some or have gotten some really good information from you as well. So appreciate it.
My pleasure.